Cerelia Prime was a jewel among the stars, a planet of vibrant forests and cascading waterfalls, the capital world of the Elorian Empire. Its people, tall and elegant with bioluminescent skin, prided themselves on their rich culture and advanced technology. But what Cerelia lacked was a military to defend it, relying instead on alliances and diplomacy to ensure peace. The Galactic War changed all of that. When the Karnak, a ruthless alien species bent on conquest, breached the outer defenses of the Elorian systems, Cerelia Prime became their prime target. The Elorians called upon their allies for aid, including humanity, known for their formidable military prowess. Among the forces sent was Sergeant Cole Harding, a seasoned veteran with scars both physical and emotional. He had seen many battles, lost many comrades, and questioned the purpose of this never-ending conflict. But orders were orders, and he found himself leading a squad of elite human soldiers on the ground during the defense of Cerelia Prime. As Harding and his team moved through the dense forest surrounding the royal palace, they heard the ominous hum of Karnak ships overhead. The skies darkened with their shadows, and the air crackled with the energy of battle. Suddenly, the ground erupted with explosions. The Karnak were launching a full-scale assault. "Move, move," Harding shouted, pushing his soldiers forward as the trees behind them splintered under the force of enemy fire. "We have to secure the palace before it's overrun." But when they reached the palace's perimeter, the sight that greeted them was grim. Karnak troops had breached the outer defenses, their towering, insectoid bodies cutting down the Elorian guards with brutal efficiency. The palace, once a symbol of serenity and grace, was now a war zone. Harding's instincts kicked in. "Alpha Team, flank left. Bravo with me. We hold the line here." As they pushed through the chaos, Harding's eyes locked onto a figure in the distance, a woman, or rather, an Elorian princess. Her bioluminescent skin glowed faintly in the smoke-filled air, her silver hair flowing as she ran. She was surrounded by a small detachment of royal guards, but they were falling fast to the relentless Karnak assault. "Cover me," Harding barked, breaking from his squad and sprinting toward the princess. The Karnak were closing in, their bladed limbs slicing through the remaining guards. Harding felt the familiar rush of adrenaline as he raised his rifle, squeezing off precise shots that brought down two of the alien beasts. But there were too many of them, and the princess was directly in their path. Without thinking, Harding threw himself into the fray, his combat knife flashing as he engaged the Karnak in brutal close-quarters combat. Each slash, each thrust was driven by instinct and training. The towering Karnak soldier reeled as Harding drove his blade into a vulnerable joint, but not before it lashed out, knocking him to the ground. Just as the creature raised its weapon to finish him off, the princess let out a cry of desperation. In that moment, something shifted within Harding. He rolled to the side, grabbed his rifle, and with a single shot, took down the Karnak. Breathing heavily, he stood, bloodied but victorious. "Are you hurt?" he asked the princess, pulling her to her feet. Her wide, violet eyes met his. No, you saved me." "Stay close," Harding commanded, his voice gruff. "We need to get you to safety." Together, they navigated through the burning palace grounds, evading enemy patrols and making their way to a hidden bunker beneath the palace. The princess, who introduced herself as Valera, was surprisingly composed despite the destruction of her home. But Harding could see the fear in her eyes, the fear of what would happen if the Karnak won this battle. Inside the bunker, Harding radioed for evac, but the situation was dire. The Karnak were overrunning the planet, and the human forces were stretched too thin to offer immediate assistance. "We're on our own for now," he muttered. Valera sat beside him, her delicate fingers trembling. "My people, they're dying." Harding looked at her, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. "We'll get you out of here. I promise." But as the hours passed and the sounds of battle raged above, a grim realization settled in. The planet was lost, and they were trapped. Chapter 2. Escaping the Karnak Trap. The bunker trembled under the impact of distant explosions. The air inside was thick with tension, and the small confines of the safe room did little to ease the mounting pressure. Harding paced back and forth, his mind racing for a solution. He had been in tight spots before, but none with the stakes this high, a planet on the brink of collapse, and the life of an alien princess in his hands. Princess Valera watched him intently, her violet eyes reflecting the low light of the bunker. She had removed the ornate headpiece that marked her royalty, letting her silver hair cascade freely around her shoulders. Her glowing skin had dimmed, a sign of her emotional exhaustion. She was no longer just a symbol of her people. She was a woman caught in the throes of war, desperate and vulnerable. "We can't stay here forever, can we?" she asked softly, breaking the silence. "No," Harding replied, stopping his pacing to face her. "The Karnak will eventually find us, and when they do, this bunker won't hold." "What about reinforcements? Can't your people send help?" "They're pinned down too. We're cut off from any immediate support." Valera looked away, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Then what do we do?" Harding knelt down in front of her, his rugged face softened by a rare moment of compassion. "We get out. There's an emergency evac point about 3 clicks from here. If we can make it there, we might have a shot. And if we don't?" Valara's voice wavered. "We will," Harding said with a confidence he didn't entirely feel. "We have to." The decision made, Harding quickly gathered what little gear they had and prepared to move. He handed Valera a small blaster-ray basic weapon, but one she could use if things got desperate. "Stay close," he instructed as they exited the bunker into the chaos of the battlefield. Cerelia Prime was unrecognizable. The once beautiful palace grounds were now a war-torn wasteland. Smoke filled the air, and the ground was littered with the bodies of both Karnak and Elorian soldiers. Harding led Valera through the ruins, moving swiftly but cautiously, his eyes scanning for any sign of the enemy. They made it about halfway to the evac point when they encountered a Karnak patrol. There were 4 of them, heavily armored and armed with plasma rifles that could cut through flesh and bone in an instant. Harding motioned for Valera to stay hidden behind a collapsed wall while he assessed the situation. The odds weren't good. Harding's heart raced as he considered his options. They could try to sneak around the patrol, but if they were spotted, it would be all over. Or he could try to take them out, one by one. But that would risk drawing more Karnak to their position. Before he could decide, Valera spoke up. "I can help." Harding looked at her in surprise. "How?" "My people have abilities," she said hesitantly. "I can use my bioluminescence to create a distraction, something to draw their attention away from us." It was a risky plan, but it might just work. "Do it," Harding said. Valera closed her eyes, her skin beginning to glow with an intense, radiant light. The Karnak soldiers, noticing the strange glow, turned their attention toward the source. As they moved toward the light, Harding acted swiftly, taking out 2 of the soldiers with precise shots before the others realized what was happening. With the patrol neutralized, they continued their trek toward the evac point. But as they moved, Harding couldn't shake the growing respect he felt for Valera. She wasn't just a helpless royal, she had courage, resourcefulness, and a determination that matched his own. And something else was growing too, a connection that neither of them had expected. Chapter 3: Desperate Measures. The ground beneath Harding and Valera shook violently as the Karnak dropship landed with a mechanical hiss, releasing a squad of towering warriors. The insectoid aliens were relentless, their black carapaces gleaming under the fiery glow of Cerelia Prime's burning forests. Each Karnak carried a plasma rifle, their hulking forms moving with terrifying speed for creatures so large. "Get down!" Harding yelled, grabbing Valara's wrist and pulling her behind a jagged outcrop of rock, just as plasma fire streaked through the air where they had been standing moments earlier. The air crackled with energy, and the ground erupted into sparks and flames as the plasma bolts struck the terrain. Harding instinctively shielded Valera with his body, pressing them both low to the ground. His heart pounded as he assessed the situation, his mind racing through tactical options. The Karnak were closing in fast, and he had few resources left. His ammunition was running low, and the evac point was still at least a kilometer away. "We're pinned down," Harding muttered under his breath, grimacing. He glanced at Valera, whose skin was still faintly glowing despite her exhaustion. She was panting, clearly struggling to keep up, but there was determination in her eyes that mirrored his own. She wasn't giving up. "They're not going to stop coming," she said softly, her voice filled with a mix of fear and resolve. "We have to do something." Harding nodded grimly. The Karnak were methodical in their pursuit, and he knew they wouldn't stop until both of them were dead or captured. He needed a plan, and fast. His eyes darted around the rocky landscape, searching for any advantage, any opportunity to buy them more time. The only way forward was through. "Listen to me," Harding said, his voice low but firm. "We're going to have to break through their line. It's risky, but it's the only way we'll make it to the evac point. Do you trust me? Valera nodded without hesitation, her violet eyes locked onto his. Yes, I trust you. Something in her voice, something about the way she said those words struck Harding deeply. There was a weight behind them that went beyond the immediate danger. He didn't have time to dwell on it, though. The Karnak were drawing closer, their guttural voices echoing through the smoky air as they prepared to sweep the area. Harding took a deep breath and checked his rifle, just a few shots left. It would have to be enough. He turned back to Valera and handed her his last spare pistol, a small but powerful weapon designed for close combat. Stay close to me, and don't hesitate to shoot if you have to, he instructed. Valera's hands trembled slightly as she took the weapon, but her grip quickly steadied. She nodded again, her face set in determination. Without wasting another second, Harding burst out from behind the rocks, his rifle raised. He fired off 2 quick shots, taking down the first Karnak soldier that appeared in his line of sight. Plasma fire whizzed past him, narrowly missing his head as he sprinted forward, keeping low and using the rocky terrain for cover. Valera was right behind him, her bioluminescent glow casting an ethereal light that seemed almost out of place in the chaos of the battlefield. Harding zigzagged between the scattered boulders, taking out another Karnak with a precise shot to the chest. But the aliens were adapting, quickly realizing the human's path. One of the Karnak soldiers let out a sharp, clicking sound to signal, and suddenly, plasma fire erupted from all sides. Down! Harding shouted, diving behind another large boulder, pulling Valera with him. The intensity of the plasma barrage was overwhelming, and Harding's mind raced for a way out. They were too exposed, and there were too many Karnak. Just when things seemed hopeless, Valera grabbed Harding's arm. I can help, she said urgently, her voice filled with a strange confidence. Valera, no. Harding replied sharply, knowing what she was about to suggest. Her bioluminescence, while beautiful, could also be a weapon. She could emit a flash of light so bright it would blind any nearby enemy. But it was dangerous for her, draining her energy rapidly, leaving her vulnerable. And in her already weakened state, it could be fatal. I can't let you sacrifice yourself, Harding growled. I'm not sacrificing myself, Valera countered fiercely. I'm buying us time. Harding opened his mouth to argue, but Valera didn't wait. She stepped out from behind the boulder, her body glowing brighter and brighter until the light was nearly blinding. The Karnak soldiers, startled, hesitated just long enough for Valera to unleash a burst of light so intense that it lit up the entire battlefield, searing into the eyes of every Karnak within range. The aliens screeched in pain, stumbling and firing wildly as they clawed at their eyes. Taking advantage of the chaos, Harding shot down 2 more Karnak before they even had time to recover. But Valera collapsed to the ground, her body limp, her glow fading. Valera! Harding yelled, rushing to her side. He scooped her up in his arms, his heart pounding. She was still breathing, but barely. Her skin, once a radiant silver, had turned pale and dull, and her eyes fluttered weakly. We're almost there, Harding whispered, more to himself than to her. We're going to make it. With Valera cradled in his arms, Harding sprinted toward the evac point, his legs burning with effort. The Karnak were still disoriented, but they were recovering quickly. Plasma fire sizzled behind him as he ran, but he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. Finally, Harding saw at a small clearing where the evac shuttle was waiting. It was surrounded by a few human soldiers, but they were under heavy fire. Without hesitation, Harding charged into the fray, firing his last few shots as he made a mad dash for the shuttle. Get her inside. Harding barked at the nearest soldier, handing Valera's limp form to him. The soldier nodded and quickly carried her into the shuttle, while Harding stayed behind to cover their retreat. The Karnak were closing in fast, but with the shuttle's engines roaring to life, Harding knew they were seconds away from escape. He fired his last shot, then dove into the shuttle just as the ramp began to close. The shuttle lifted off, soaring into the sky just as the Karnak soldiers reached the clearing. Harding collapsed onto the floor, gasping for breath, his body aching from the effort. But his eyes were fixed on Valera, who lay unconscious on one of the seats, her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. We made it, he whispered, relief flooding through him. But as the shuttle sped away from the battlefield, Harding couldn't shake the growing feeling that something had changed between them, that the bond forged in the fires of battle was something far deeper than either of them had expected. Chapter 4. The Proposal. Several days had passed since the harrowing escape from Cerealia Prime. The Galactic fleet, both human and Elorian forces, had regrouped, and the remnants of the Elorian civilians had been relocated to a nearby space station, an enormous structure that orbited a neutral planet. The station bustled with refugees, medics, diplomats, and soldiers, all recovering from the chaos of the war and trying to find a way forward. Sergeant Cole Harding stood alone in the corridor just outside the medical wing. His uniform was neat, though his face carried the exhaustion of the past few weeks. Battles left physical scars, but it was the emotional weight, the memories of the fallen, the uncertainty of survival that always stuck with him. Yet here, now, his thoughts were singular. Valera. The Elorian princess had been unconscious since their rescue, her body still recovering from the energy she expended during their escape. In the sterile quiet of the Starbase medical bay, she had rested, surrounded by advanced healing technology that helped restore her bioluminescent glow. Harding had barely left her side, only stepping out briefly when the medical staff insisted. Now, he lingered outside her room, staring at the door. Inside, the alien princess, someone he never could have imagined meeting, let alone fighting alongside, lay, recovering from their shared ordeal. He hadn't expected to feel this way. She was royalty, an alien from a world vastly different from his own, but their bond was undeniable. The war had forced them together, and now, the thought of leaving her felt impossible. With a deep breath, Harding finally stepped forward, allowing the automatic doors to slide open. The quiet hum of the medical devices greeted him as he entered. Valera lay in the center of the room, her silver skin glowing softly, no longer the faint, dying light he had feared in their final moments on Cerealia Prime. Her silver hair cascaded over the pillow, and her violet eyes now open watched him as he approached. "Cole," she whispered, her voice fragile but steady. Harding froze for a moment, a wave of relief washing over him at the sound of her voice. "Valera," he said softly, stepping closer to her bedside. "You're awake?" She gave him a tired but genuine smile. "Yes, and I'm alive, thanks to you." Harding shook his head, sitting down next to her. "We saved each other. You were incredible out there." Valera's hand, still pale but warm, reached out and grasped his. "I wouldn't have survived without you. You stayed with me." Harding's breath caught in his chest. There was a warmth in her touch, a silent acknowledgement of all they had been through together. The connection between them, forged in the chaos of battle, was undeniable. But the deeper truth that their bond was no longer just about survival was something neither had fully voiced. Yet here, in the quiet of this sterile room, it seemed to hover between them like an unspoken promise. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other. The war, the dangers, the chaos, it all felt far away now. But Harding knew that in the back of his mind, his duty still called to him. The battles weren't over. The Karnak were still out there, and there was more to do. Valera's voice broke the silence, her tone suddenly more serious. "Cole, I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to thank me, Valera. You fought beside me. I did what I had to do to keep us both alive." She shook her head, her grip on his hand tightening ever so slightly. "No, this is more than duty, more than just survival." Harding felt his heart skip a beat. "What do you mean?" Valera's violet eyes locked onto his. "I know what you did out there wasn't just because you were ordered to. I saw the way you looked at me when I was in danger. You didn't just save me because I'm a princess, or because it was your job. You saved me because you care." Harding blinked, caught off guard by her directness. He had spent his entire career as a soldier burying his emotions, focusing only on the mission, the objective, the next battle. But Valera had seen through that. She had seen the part of him that he rarely allowed himself to acknowledge. Harding hesitated, searching for the right words. "I didn't want to lose you, Valera. It wasn't just about the mission." Her lips curved into a gentle smile. "I didn't want to lose you either." The room fell into a comfortable silence once more, but this time the air was thick with unspoken words. Harding couldn't deny what was happening between them, but how could this work? She was royalty, the heir to the Elorian Empire, and he was just a human soldier, warrior from a different world. Their lives, their responsibilities, their futures were on completely different paths. And yet, The thought of leaving her now, of parting ways after all they had been through, felt unbearable. "I have to ask you something," Valera said suddenly, breaking through his thoughts. Harding straightened in his chair, his pulse quickening. "Anything?" Valera's hand trembled slightly in his, but she held his gaze, her violet eyes burning with a quiet intensity. "Marry me." Harding's world tilted on its axis. For a moment, he thought he had misheard her. "What? What did you say?" Valera smiled, though there was a nervous edge to it. "I want you to stay with me, Cole. Not just as a friend or an ally, but as my husband." Harding opened his mouth, but no words came out. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest. Marry her? The idea seemed impossible, surreal. He had never even considered something like this. And yet, when he looked into her eyes, he knew she was serious. This wasn't just some impulsive decision. Valera had thought this through, and in her own way, she was offering him more than just her hand. She was offering him a place in her world, in her life. "I know it sounds strange," Valera continued, her voice soft but firm. "But our people, my people, we believe in more than just alliances. We believe in bonds that transcend borders and bloodlines. You saved my life, Cole, and in doing so, you became part of my destiny. I want you by my side." Harding's mind raced. The implications of what she was asking were staggering. Marrying her would mean leaving behind everything he knew: his role as a soldier, his life on Earth, his comrades. He would become part of the Elorian Empire, tied to a world and a people he barely knew. But at the same time, the thought of walking away from Valera felt like walking away from something far more important. "Valera, He struggled to find the words, his emotions warring inside him. "I don't know if I can do that. I don't know if I can be the person you need me to be." "You already are," she whispered, leaning forward. "You've already proven that. I don't need a hero or a warrior. I need you." Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. For so long, Harding had defined himself by his role as a soldier, by his duty, his discipline, his service to humanity. But Valera was offering him something different, something more. She was offering him a future. Harding took a deep breath, his heart pounding. "If I do this, if I stay with you, what happens next?" Valera smiled, her eyes shining with hope. "We figure it out. Together." Harding looked down at their joined hands, feeling the weight of the moment. The war, the battles, the bloodshed, it had all led to this. A choice. A chance for something more. Slowly, he nodded, meeting her gaze once more. "Then I'll stay. I'll stay with you." Valera's smile widened, and for the first time in what felt like years, Harding allowed himself to hope for a future beyond the battlefield. As the stars outside the station continued to twinkle, Harding and Valera made their silent promise to each other, a bond forged not just in battle, but in trust, sacrifice, and love. Together, they would face whatever came next, united by the choices they had made. Epilogue: A New Dawn. The formalities came swiftly after Harding's decision. As soon as the Elorian Council learned of Princess Valera's wishes, the wheels of diplomacy and ceremony began to turn at breakneck speed. Harding, now feeling the full weight of what he had agreed to, was thrust into a whirlwind of meetings, preparations, and briefings. But despite the overwhelming pace of events, one thing remained constant: Valera's presence at his side. The Elorian culture was one steeped in tradition, and marriage between two people from different species was almost unheard of. But Harding's bravery, and Valera's unwavering insistence that he was the one meant for her, left the council with little room to argue. Though there were whispers of doubt among the Elorian nobility and the human military command, neither group could ignore the undeniable bond that had formed between the human soldier and the alien princess. The ceremony was held on Valera's homeworld, Cerelia Prime, now liberated from Karnak control thanks to the combined efforts of the human and Elorian forces. Though much of the planet had been scarred by war, the Elorians worked tirelessly to restore the grandeur of their capital in time for the event. Cerelia's royal gardens, once vibrant with life, were now filled with new growth, an apt symbol of the hope and unity that Harding and Valera's union represented. On the day of the wedding, Harding stood in a secluded part of the royal gardens, adjusting the formal Elorian robe he had been given to wear. It felt strange to him, being dressed in such a ceremonial outfit, long, flowing, with intricate silver embroidery that shimmered in the light. He wasn't sure he'd ever get used to the Elorian way of doing things, but today, he didn't mind. Today wasn't about comfort, it was about commitment. As he looked out across the sprawling gardens, his thoughts wandered to how much had changed. Just weeks ago, he had been a soldier, entrenched in the life of a warrior, thinking only of the next battle and the survival of his squad. Now, he was standing in a royal garden, about to marry an alien princess. It was a surreal, almost unbelievable turn of events, and yet, Harding had never felt more certain about anything in his life. The sound of soft footsteps behind him broke his reverie. He turned to see Valera approaching, radiant in her flowing gown of shimmering white, her silver hair adorned with delicate crystal flowers that caught the light. Her skin glowed softly, not just from her natural bioluminescence, but from the joy that radiated from within her. Her violet eyes sparkled as she smiled at him. "You look beautiful," Harding said, his voice uncharacteristically soft. "And you look incredibly handsome in that robe," Valera teased, her smile widening as she approached him. Harding chuckled, running a hand through his short-cropped hair. "I still think I look like I'm wearing a curtain." Valera laughed, the sound light and musical. "You look perfect." As she stood before him, Harding reached out and took her hands in his. The connection between them, so strong and undeniable, surged through him, and for a moment, the weight of everything else, the war, the politics, the ceremony, faded away. It was just the two of them. "Are you ready?" Valera asked softly. Harding nodded, his grip on her hands tightening slightly. "I've never been more ready." Together, they turned and began to walk toward the central clearing where the ceremony was to take place. As they approached, the gathered Gessalorian nobles, human military officers, and dignitaries from across the galaxy stood in respectful silence. The air was filled with a sense of awe, not just for the ceremony itself, but for what it represented. A union of two worlds, two species, bound together by something greater than politics or war. At the front of the gathering, the Elorian High Priestess stood, her long, flowing robes adorned with the symbols of the stars. She raised her arms as Harding and Valera approached, and the crowd fell into a deeper silence. "Today, we witnessed something rare," the priestess began, her voice echoing through the garden. "A bond that transcends the boundaries of race, of species, and of worlds. This union is a reminder that in the vastness of the galaxy, it is not our differences that define us, but our shared courage, our shared love." Harding's heart pounded in his chest as the priestess continued, speaking of the ancient Elorian traditions and the significance of the bond they were about to form. He glanced at Valera, who was watching him with a soft smile, her eyes filled with emotion. She had been through so much, her world nearly destroyed, her people displaced, her life put at risk, and yet here she was, standing strong beside him, ready to face the future together. When the priestess asked them to speak their vows, Valera was the first to step forward. She took a deep breath, her voice steady but filled with emotion as she spoke. "Cole Harding, when I first met you, I was terrified. My world was crumbling around me, and I didn't know if I would survive. But you stood by me, fought for me, and showed me a strength and kindness that I had never known before. You risked your life for mine, and in doing so, you became more than just a soldier to me. You became my protector, my confidant, and my heart. Today, I vow to stand by you, to face whatever comes our way, and to share with you a life filled with hope, with love, and with endless possibilities. I choose you, now and always." Harding swallowed hard, his throat tight with emotion as Valera's words washed over him. He had never been one for speeches, but as he looked into her eyes, he knew exactly what to say. "Valera," he began, his voice rough with feeling, "I've spent my life fighting battles on distant planets, against enemies I barely understood. But when I met you, I realized that there was something worth fighting for beyond the battlefield. You showed me a world I never knew existed, and more importantly, you showed me a part of myself I didn't even know was there. You've given me hope when I thought I had none left. And today, I vow to protect you, to stand by you, and to build a future with you that's as strong as the bond we've forged. I choose you, to now and always." There was a brief pause, and then the priestess raised her hands once more, her voice ringing out over the assembled crowd. "With these vows, you are bound. May your union be as eternal as the stars, and may your love shine as brightly as the galaxies." With that, the ceremony was complete. The crowd erupted into applause, the sound echoing through the gardens as Harding and Valera turned to face them, hand in hand. But in that moment, it wasn't the applause that mattered. It was the promise they had made to each other, the promise of a future, of a life together, no matter what challenges lay ahead. As the festivities continued long into the night, Harding and Valera stole a moment away from the crowd, standing together on a balcony overlooking the restored palace gardens. The stars above them twinkled in the clear night sky, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, the galaxy seemed at peace. Harding wrapped his arm around Valera, pulling her close as they looked out at the stars. "So, this is our future," he said quietly. Valera smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "Yes, and it's just the beginning." Together, they stood in silence, watching the dawn of their new life unfold before them, a life filled with hope, with love, and with the promise of a future they would face together. The stars, it seemed, had aligned for them after all.